We're good? All right. You start from the top? All right. Very good. So welcome to Black Tech Interactive's kickoff of the Fundable series, or workshop series. This is an opportunity for us to lean into several topics around fundraising that are typically not dealt with. One is angel investing, which is what we'll be covering this evening. We also have another workshop that we'll be doing on equity crowdfunding and also reward crowdfunding /reward crowdfunding. Another on the America Seed Fund, which is offered by SBIR and the National Science Foundation. And then another workshop on pitch prep, right? So how to present your, put your best foot forward when you're speaking with investors and pitching to investors. So my name is Henry Rock. I'm the founder and executive director of City Startup Labs. We also have Black Tech Interactive under our umbrella of things that we're up to. And we have really an extraordinary panel. We're going to do this a little bit differently than we planned. This is going to be less workshop, and I guess it turns out fine that it's not a workshop, given you know how many folks we have in the room here. We're going to do this more in a panel format, right? So we have two really heavyweights in the angel investing space here in Charlotte. We have Walt Frye, who is an angel investor in his own right, and he'll tell you a little more about his background. And Greg Brown, who is the administrator of the Charlotte Angel Fund, which is the leading angel fund here in Charlotte, right? They've been at it for a number of years, and so Greg will tell you more about what the Charlotte Angel Fund and also his own business is up to. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. We have bathrooms. I think most of you have attended the bathroom, but it's in the back. When you wrap up with the food that you're eating, if you don't mind, if you can just like toss that in the bins there. And then also we're going to take, if we can, we might take a break sort of halfway in between for a bio break and stretch our legs. We want to thank our sponsor, NC Idea. Just talking about NC Idea. We want to thank them for sponsoring this event and sponsoring the series. So without further ado, let's get into the introductions here and your background. So Walt, why don't you tell us?
Sure. So first, Henry, thank you so much for inviting us to participate. I'm really honored to be here tonight. We've been friends and colleagues from the very beginning. The very first Charlotte entrepreneurial ecosystem event I attended was Henry's, the City Startup Labs. I was looking around what's going on, and I took my background, and he said there was this event, City Startup Labs, millennials interested in entrepreneurship. I said, I'm not a millennial, but I'm just going to show up. So I show up at this event, and Henry says, you sure you have to event? I said, yeah, I'm sure. So I've got a tendency to show up. So I'm Walt Frye. I have been in the angel investing arena probably for about 6 years or so, 7 years that I kind of started thinking about entrepreneurship as a domain. So my business domain, besides being a military veteran, and I'll talk about this in Memorial Day symbol, and being in financial service as a trader, and then as a financial service executive at Bank of America, then Ally Financial, then Fiserv, then another company Conduit. Besides doing those things, which kind of give me a perspective on how I want to interact in terms of my financial perspective and about how I want to interact with the community, I served what I call as I had what I'll call a entrepreneurship and community sabbatical, where I said to myself, I've been traveling around for a long time, that hey, would it be nice to live and work in the same city? So I committed to doing that in Charlotte. I supported and was executive director of a public-private partnership supporting the entrepreneur community, eventually called Innovate Charlotte. And during that time period, helped to engage and build my own perspective on this work. That's also where I met this young man, Greg Brown, because for me, Greg has been really instrumental in my kind of knowledge in this space. For me, I felt confident coming in this 6 or 7 years ago from an investment perspective, but this body of work, this domain of angel investing and venture capital investing is different. And it requires a little different skills and a little different engagement, personal engagement, we can talk about. So I'm happy to be here to share about my journey in this space and my perspective as I continue to be actively engaged and wanting to see the success of Charlotte and the success of entrepreneurs go.
Thank you. That's great.
Yeah, hi, I'm Greg Brown. As Henry mentioned, I'm the administrator of something called Charlotte Angel Fund, which is it's a group of 150 people who have pooled some capital for the purpose of making what are typically early stage investments in Carolinas-based technology-driven companies. So I said typically there are exceptions to everything I just said, right? In terms of the sector of the business, the location, kind of how early is early, lots of exceptions to it. One of the things that our group does is we make decisions collectively. So I'm the administrator, I'm not the fund manager. So Walt, who was kind enough to participate as an investor in the fund, he didn't put the money and say, here, Greg, just do what you want with it and send me a report at the end of the year. Our members make the decision about what we're going to invest in or not. So the group sort of decides, and if a sufficient majority of us decide we want to invest in a certain company, then that's what we'll do.
So by the way, I don't want to steal your thunder because we want to come back to Charlotte Venture Fund, Angel Fund, excuse me, in depth. So tell us more about.
Tell about me. Okay,
Yeah,
you got it. So I'm a finance guy by background. I got into this world because I was working in public accounting, and a very wealthy man hired me to be the CFO of what they call his family office, right? So many wealthy people say, I need a family office to just manage my affairs, right? And that goes all the way from their financial things to, hey, I'm having a party and I want some sweet corn. Somebody here in my office ought to arrange for that, right? So varied set of responsibilities. I've actually gone to a farmer's market, purchased sweet corn, figured out how to pack it, how to get it to, when the guy says that's what I want,
Yes.
that's what you do in the family office. So, but he had built and sold a company, so it was a source of his wealth. He was an entrepreneur, and at that point, he was investing. He was very active as an angel investor.
So one more time, he did what? He
built and sold a company,
okay.
which was how he created his wealth. He grew up shooting squirrels for dinner, right? He grew up in a very poor household in northern Iowa, and they were out hunting for food.
Right.
And so he built wealth. He was reinvesting his capital in various entrepreneurial activities, and so I learned my first learnings in this space were being the guy who accompanied him to these meetings and just observing, right? And watching how things happen, right? And so that gave me access to the room to learn some things. So since then, I've spent half of my career on the investing side. I've been partner in a couple of different venture capital firms and running Charlotte Angel Fund, and also as CFO, or what we call a chief operating officer type role in either companies that were privately financed or early stage public companies. So half of my career on the side of the table providing capital, and half on the side wanting to receive capital from investors of various sorts. So that's how I get to here. Henry referred to my business. So there's Charlotte Angel Fund, and then I have a company called Cardinal Finance that does various forms of finance and accounting consulting work for small to mid-sized businesses.
Thank you, thank you. I want to make sure that everyone has a copy of this, all right, because hopefully what the takeaways will be are these four that we have listed here. We're gonna, this topic is so meaty, right? There was no way that we're going to be able to cover it in the time frame that we have. So I do have a resource that I'd like you to, in your notes section, to write down. It's called Founders Pocket Guide, Raising Angel Capital. You get it on Amazon. And if you're interested in pursuing this this way of funding your venture, this particular guide is, and there are a number of other founders guides that come with that. It's a set of them, and this is one of them, but it's a great resource. So I would suggest that you check that out. So what I'd like to also do is really kind of do a level set, if we could, just to find out, you know, what the interests of folks are and where they are and why they came to this, right? So just by a show of hands, how many folks are actual tech founders? We have a technology company, all right? Great, great. How many are founders of another type of business other than technology? Okay. How many of you are investors or prospective investors? Okay. And how many of you are just curious? Just here for curiosity's sake. So you can check a couple of boxes. What I will also ask you to do at the end of this, I'll give you another reminder, but there's a little QR code here. I'd like you to kind of click on that at the end, because there's a little survey. So we'd like you to kind of tell us a little more about you, if you don't mind, and also what you think of this. So one of the things you mentioned is, you mentioned angel investing and you mentioned venture capital. Both of you mentioned that, right? So we often hear these terms. So let's try to unpack angel investing versus venture capital, and what's the difference between the two, and how might that be value to our audience here?
I'll make a comment about the broad category, and then I'll hand over to a more expert commentary. So from a venture capital perspective, early stage investing in companies that are at different levels of maturity that Greg will explain more in detail, I think. When you look at that and look at why it's important for us to talk about this, and the philosophy here is that when you look at the distribution of venture capital for women and minorities, as an example, about 2.8% of venture capital in the whole space went to women, 2.8% in 2021. This from Diversity DC was the stat. And about 0.64% went to Black or Latinx founders in the whole space. That's billions of dollars. So the reason that's important is because I think where entrepreneurs start in terms of their pathway to engaging investors and being prepared for the level of investment that's being sought out is really critical, and critical to their readiness to engage. So for angel investing, and I'm going to say this part. So as for angel investing, it is typically seeking investment from individuals or groups of investors at a early stage, oftentimes pre-revenue. The category between we'll call it friends and family, and more formalized access to capital from groups or individual investors. That angel investor has some parameters in terms of his or her legal requirements in terms of being able to declare an angel investor. There's IRS and SEC requirements about kind of what that looks like from a Walt perspective. And it kind of allows an investor to choose individually whether they want to invest in a certain venture or company, with the assumption, the knowledge that they have some knowledge of the investment space and knowledge and the visibility on their willingness and ability to take risk. So that really speaks to the investors and groups of investors, and again, their willingness and ability to take risk. And those angels, moderate to high net worth individuals, have the opportunity to invest in you as individuals and as companies. So that's the way I would think about angels, as being as we focused on that individual and groups of individuals who have choices about investing in their early stages.
So I would describe this, I want to differentiate on a couple of different dimensions between angel investor and venture capitalist. And like everything in life, none of this is absolute truth, but generality. Angel investors are investing their own money, their capital. Venture capitalists are investing somebody else's. They're investing the money of someone who's entrusted it to them, right? Almost no one I know thinks of themselves professionally as, I'm an angel investor. They're a physician, they're an executive at USAA, they're whatever, they're something else, and they happen to do some angel investing, right? So this isn't their profession. Venture capitalists, if you meet them most often, if you would meet them at a social event, you say, yeah, tell me about what you do for a living. They would say, I'm a venture capitalist. That is their profession, right? They are managing other people's capital. The venture capitalist is 100% driven by economics, right? They're entrusted with this capital and they are expected to provide a certain economic return to the people who invested in their fund. Angel investors, the economics of it is one piece, I think, of the equation of why someone does angel investing. It's an important piece, but if all they want, if as an angel investor, if all you wanted to do was, hey, I want to put some capital to work in this category, you could just hand it to a venture capitalist and let them do that work for you. So you like the connection to it, you like some personal involvement and knowing the entrepreneur and having that understanding. Maybe you have an interest in, I want to help a certain category of people, whether that be female founders, Black-led businesses, companies from a certain geography, what have you. So there can be a certain cause component, or just, hey, I want to help entrepreneurs. I've had success. I was able to build a business. Maybe somebody invested in my business and enabled that for me, and I want to pay that forward in a way, right? So the angel investors have I would say, a more complex mix of motivations than a venture capitalist.
But let me be clear. Even everything he said is true, but I still want my money.
Yes, yes.
Let me be clear. So there's this thing that's very true and about the personal nature of the angel investing, right?
Yeah.
It is, there are a lot of parameters that are absolutely common. So the kind of the things we look for across, experience, capability of the founders themselves, the business, scalability, blah, 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 all that. But there's also this personal nature about wanting to be involved and engaged. So it's very consuming. It's time and emotionally consuming, because I personally am personally engaged when I am engaged, right? So it's really important that distinction is key. I mean, it's personal funds with with companies or founders or in groups of founders that really makes a difference. But yeah, I like you, but I still want my money. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's I think that want the money. I think a really important concept is So the wheel has to keep turning, right? And so let's think of a metaphorical table, and all founders are on one side and capital providers on the other, angel investors. And I think so the angel investor knows that the way the game starts is to push some money that way, right? It has to. And you do that for a while, but then you get to the point where you say, I got enough money over there. So for me to be willing to make another investment, I'm willing to reinvest money that comes back to me, but you can't just forever push it that direction. That's right. And that's true at an individual level. And I think it's also true to a macro level. And so the wheel stops if there is an economic return to the capital provider, right? So it has to make economic sense for, at a macro level, this cycle to continue, right? Otherwise, it's just a donation. And everybody, we all have a limit to how much, each of us say, I bet everybody in this room donates to something, right? But you sort of, you think about it in context of how much can I afford to donate? And there's some limit, whether your income is here or here or here, there's some limit to how much of that'll happen, right? And so it has to work economically.
So on that note though, how do investors get their money back? I mean, so there's typically an exit. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the term exit, why don't you explain what an exit is? But in an exit, how would an investor typically get their money back so that it's not just continually flowing out, but that there is this return that will allow them to reinvest or to at least feel satisfied enough that this was an exercise that wasn't in vain? Yeah, want to check that one?
Well, I think two things. I think it's not only the exit, but also recapitalization of capital. So there are a couple of things that happen with it. For the exit, there's expectation from investors, angel investors, about the return on their portfolio. So we have a point of view about, at what stage and how much do we allocate in our portfolios to certain investments at certain stages of their maturity that'll get to some level of return for the total portfolio. So that could happen a couple of different ways. An interesting and ideal way is an exit, where you are building a business, and one of another group that really is that I'm a part of that's really active in this is Venture South really has a return on investment exit perspective. So that return is based on your perspective on building a business with the intentionality of exiting in terms of selling it all out to another private entity, maybe an IPO, if possible. All these other things that result in capital going back to the investors who were with you early on. So there are a number of ways to get there, but the intentionality is that at some point in time, this capital, your effort, your engagement in the marketplace, resulting in revenues that generate returns, will result in a company that's more valuable than it was before, and you will exit in some way, returning capital back to us. So that's kind of what is a very important part of this, and that can have several ways to happen, but all of those absolutely for us result in our ability to get hopefully reasonable returns, not always the lucky back to us, but really back into the process.
Yeah. So I think a couple concepts important to understand. So that comes back to us. So the angel investor is typically investing in the exchange is we're investing and we're receiving a certain percentage ownership in your company. Right. So, what we're looking for is, and the value of the business is probably this when we invest, right? And the intent is that the value is going to grow. And then, as Walt described, that in some manner, whether it's selling the business, some recapitalization, something that creates capital that flows back. Because none of us, like, I could love Brooks and I could love what business he's doing, but if he says his dream is to build this so that his 30 years from now, he can hand the keys to his son, right? I'm like, I'm not into that deal, right? Like, when's the money coming back? Like, when are we selling it, right? So the intent is we're building something. What's going to appeal to an angel investor is you're building something with the intent and with the understanding that there's an obligation to create some sort of liquidity opportunity for the investor and that you're looking to build something of magnitude, right? And that concept of magnitude is why you hear investors obsess about things like market size and how scalable is this and everything, because it gets to the idea of how big could this possibly get, because the opportunity to get really big really needs to be there for the angel investors' math to work.
Sorry, yes, of course, thank you. How long does the investor wait to connect it? Is there an average time?
Average, so sure. So the standard answer that will come out of people's mouth is 5 to 7 years, I would say. The reality is that the big wins take longer than that. Like, so I'll use Avid Exchange here locally, right? An example, probably the preeminent local example of a company, a Charlotte-based startup that created a lot of wealth for angel investors. So the original investors in Avid Exchange received a return of 50 times their money. But it took 15 years for that to happen. I'm sure Avid Exchange had multiple opportunities along the way where they could have sold that business and maybe returned 3 times their money or 5 times, but they're playing a longer game. So the big wins take longer. The angel investor should be perfectly prepared to be content with a 5 to 7 year exit horizon, right? If you're talking to somebody who has a shorter fuse than that, then they're probably not a good fit to be an angel investor in your business.
I think the other thing is that 5 to 7 years, that may end up being 15 or 20 years for the long term. That 5 to 7 years also goes into account those recaps that could take place.
Yeah.
And you can choose to ride for 15 years, or there might be an opportunity to you as an investor also to choose to make a different decision in terms of your capital too.
Just another housekeeping note. Can we put our phones on silent? Thank you. And please have a seat.
I'm gonna sit at a computer.
Oh, okay, all right, well, then stand. What I'd like to do is to, I mean, we can have some interjection of some questions, but we'll have plenty of Q&A time. Right, so that's part of the reason why I wanted you to use this to gather up your notes, and we can jump in, because no doubt there may be a question that we cover in the questions that I have for the panelists that you may have as a question as well. Now, what's a good way to find angel investors? Right? Because they just don't grow on trees. You just don't walk down the street, stumble on somebody that says, angel investor. How do you find them? I mean, there's the Charlotte Angel Fund. That's a place, a resource for that. But aside from that, we will talk about CAP in a minute. But aside from that, how does one network and find, angel investors? What would be a good resource or a good, how would you direct someone?
Really good question. I'd say start to show Angel Fund. But honestly, this is kind of the dilemma, right? Because a lot of this you talk about who likely are angel funds, who can be in the category, and how do you gain access to high net worth individuals who might be in the category. It's a dilemma because there's about getting access to networks of people who you may know or may not know through family networks, through professional associations, through sororities, to fraternities, for all these other things that kind of where you might find people, generally speaking. A lot of that really comes back to kind of the thinking about maybe not angels, but around the friends and family, kind of how to find people to be a part of this. But a lot of it also becomes about being actively engaged in the community. So we in Charlotte are seeking to, and other communities as well, seeking to be a more active entrepreneurial ecosystem. And we have been growing this and doing a great job for several years. And your ability to be engaged in the ecosystem and meet people who are demonstrating they have interest in the space is a big part of it. But there's the dilemma. If you don't come from a background where you have access to wealthy people or access to certain networks, it becomes a little bit more challenging. And I think that's what Henry's trying to bridge too, in terms of kind of how do you kind of bridge that challenge that is a challenge.
Yeah, so the set aside a group like Charlotte Angel Fund that is intentional about trying to find deal flow. The challenge is individual angel investor is not going to put up a website and say, I have a lot of money and I'm willing and I'm looking for investments, right? They don't want that. Because I promise you, they'll have lots of people contact them. So they're not advertising it, right? Your local surgeon or whatever their job is, they do some of this on the side. They don't put up a billboard. They don't put up a website and say, I'm an angel investor. So how do you find these people? If I would ask other entrepreneurs, right? Ask other business owners, hey, who do you know? They might give you some ideas. There are resources in the community. Henry would know some folks. Places like Venture Prize, Innovate Charlotte, that are kind of entrepreneur support organizations are going to have some visibility of this. Make yourself visible. Attend pitch breakfast, right? There's something called Million Cups. The more you can be out there and making the world known, letting the world know what you're doing. Don't be afraid. Don't be the entrepreneur who's afraid to express what they're doing, right? I'm pretty to whatever your idea isn't so special that you need to keep it under a basket and not let anybody know you need to tell everybody until they're sick of hearing it about what you're doing. Create awareness about it, pitch breakfast. Absolutely, that's a place for entrepreneurs to practice their presentations. That's sort of the headline. But there are investors in that room. And if they're interested, they'll come up and talk to you. Same thing with Million Cups, right? Another sort of entrepreneurial opportunity to, hey, just sort of practice my pitch, get feedback from people. But there are prospective investors in that room. And if they like what you're doing, if they like what they hear, they'll make themselves known, right? Be out there.
Yeah. So what kinds of businesses, because we kind of took the pulse here about who's a tech entrepreneur, tech founder, et cetera. But what types of business, what sectors do you typically find angel investors gravitating towards? Or are there angel investors that say, hey, listen, I'm only interested in creative businesses, ones that are, if you're in the music industry or you're in the film, that's my cup of tea, right? Or, we'll talk about this a bit. The Charlotte Angel Fund has a particular kind of profile of businesses that you're looking for. But in your experience, both of you, what types of sectors do you typically see showing up as the ones that are where angels tend to gravitate?
So, I'll answer for it. It depends, right? Greg described our characteristics of angel investors that are really kind of individual, personalized, not who they are, where they come from, what jobs they have, et cetera. So, it depends. So some aspects of it do absolutely have to do with, is this, this venture, this company in an industry that has growth potential? Is there market share that can be captured? Is it something that that can grow at a reasonable pace to a reasonable size where I can expect a return that is within my parameters? So there's some growth parameters that are really important, right? There's some things that are that potential to grow that may be better than others in some cases. For individual angel investors, I would say it comes back to what they could be, what they're particularly interested in, or have experience in, or have had success in the past, either because of an industry or type of person, et cetera. So for me personally, I was drawn to fintech, and I was drawn to Queen City Fintech, RevTech at that time, and that was because that was my domain. And that's what I was interested in, and that's what I was engaged in.
What is fintech?
Financial technology is the domain of technology that supports enablement of financial services, payments, et cetera. So that space was attractive to me. I was also attracted to me because of the scale and and the opportunity to grow, et cetera. And again, by having some knowledge in the space. But that wasn't always based. So, especially when I work with groups like a Shell Langer Fund and other groups similar, they may have give an opportunity where you learn more because there's others in the group who have other expertise that allow you to invest differently because you're learning more. But it's all true, what Greg said. It would probably be a fool's errand for an investor to invest without a perspective, without a knowledge base, without a view about the industry, but it all depends. And I think we're trying to get to a point where we're not only looking at fintech, and we're not only looking at insurtech or technology services in general, but other spaces that have returns that matter. And some dirty businesses have good returns, by the way. So
Yeah. So generally, we'll go back to the investor need to imagine that this could get, there needs to be somewhere, if there's a deck of cards of possible outcomes, one of those needs to be ridiculously large, right? And so we need something that, all right, what sorts of businesses have the best chances of getting ridiculously large? They typically, so they need to not have geographic constraint, right? Geographic constraint, we'll go to the other end. Why don't angel investors typically invest in local Italian restaurants, right? Because how big, there's only so many chairs in that restaurant, right? And so this thing isn't you're not gonna get 10 times your money back investing. You might get some nice dinners on the house and all that sort of thing, right? But you're not gonna get 10 times your money investing in a local Italian restaurant. So generally you're looking for businesses that don't have geographic constraint, that aren't capital intensive, right? You're not having to build a factory and lots of that sort of thing, right? So that's why technology is a great enabler of no geographic constraint and relatively little capital to expand. If you have so software business is sort of a nirvana of that, right? You write some code, you create your technology product. Now we're just renting a little more server space and assigning some new user IDs to grow, right? Versus, having to, I need a bigger factory. I need to rent more buildings. I need to, so able to expand kind of or generally without many limits, and in a capital, in a business that isn't capital intensive. Now I just described generalities, but there are people who invest in, there are angel investors who put money into restaurants. Right? It's not, but it's not going to be, but my one comment I would make on that is it's the people who are going to invest in that restaurant are going to be friends of the owner, right? It's going to be friends and family, not, or perhaps a successful restaurateur who knows what it takes to be successful and what the attributes are of something that's attractive, right? It's going to be somebody who, and Walt touched on it, has experience in that space to make them feel they have an unfair advantage in some way. Versus just, I like their lasagna.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What about other types of restaurants that franchises that have diversified their venue? Like you have certain franchises that are all over the United States, they're global, they're practically global. They're not restricted to one given regional area. Is something like that, would you, like an investor would be more interested, would be more intriguing, finding more appealing because of the diversification of the venue?
So yes, a franchise business that happened to be franchising restaurants, I wouldn't think of as investing in a restaurant business, right? I mean, it could be, that franchise could be a cleaning company, or it could be, sandwich shop or whatever that, or gym or whatever it is.
So what stands out is you talk about the capital intensity, but it's also resource intensity. Your resource intensity. How many things can you personally manage as an entrepreneur, as an individual, or a small team? So the capital intensity matters. What you describe as franchising, it's really, you describe it a lot of different ways, but it's not really managing a restaurant. It's managing marketing, engagement, relationships, all these other things.
And what percentage of the equity do you guys would be interested in? Like, is it like if you own 51%, that means you pretty much own the company and someone else owns 49%. They are, not.
Well, we'll actually get into that question around ownership and how that applies to angel investors. But since you brought it up, let's talk about ownership, right? And oftentimes, what happens I'll say sort of unsophisticated founders is that there's this inclination to not want to give up too much equity in your business, nor take on debt, right? So you can't have it really both ways, right? You got to just one or the other. Right? You got to give up some equity, you got to take on some debt, unless, of course, as you said earlier, you're doing a friends and family route. And I don't know how many of us really have friends and family that can just, write that check, and not look for a return. Because you said, where's the money, right? So I would imagine that friends and family are going to be even more on your case about where's the money, where's the return. So, when you don't want to give up equity, and you don't want to incur debt, you're in a bind. So let's set the table for what to expect if you are engaged with an angel investor and you're we'll talk about what stage of venture we're talking about. But let's just say at the pre-revenue stage, right? What might an angel investor be looking at, or what might the founder be looking at in terms of kind of equity that they have to
I'm not sophisticated in that question, so I'm going to pass that on to Greg. So I got a point.
Generally, if you're, and I'm answering this in the context of an early stage tech company. Okay, which and why that matters is most of them, they're going to need to raise successive rounds of capital, right? Versus I need one round of capital to get my business going, right? So in those businesses, you typically think in terms of runway, meaning this cash that I'm raising, how long, like, is this a month's worth of capital? Is this 2 years worth of capital? What is this? If you're raising enough money, and so 18 months worth of capital would be kind of a typical runway for a round of capital, because that's long enough to accomplish some things and earn the next bit of money, right? Typically, if you're raising enough money to last you for 18 months, you're going to give up 15 to 25% of the equity in your business. There are exceptions to that, whatever, but I'm saying, the fat part of the curve, 15 to 25% of the business is usually what you're going to give up for 18 months worth of money. So that's just a general. So you'll hear there are more sophisticated answers to that, and getting into, you'll hear concepts about valuation and all that, but 15 to 25%, that investor, Charlotte Angel Fund, not only do we not want to be the majority owner in anything, I don't think we'd be willing to be, right? So that's not what we're after. None of us want to run your business. Running your business is hard. I'd rather invest in it, right? And let you do the work and make me some money, hopefully.
I have a question. I'm from Brazil, actually.
Fala português.
Yeah, that's it. In Brazil, most of the investors they only invest in companies that has already revenue. But I see that here in the States, maybe the investor invests in some company that they know in the future going to be bought by another huge company like WhatsApp, for example. In Brazil, WhatsApp would never be invested by Brazilians, actually. In my portfolio, for example, as a founder, as an investor, I have both companies that I know that has a lot of data information in the future going to be bought, and company that has her revenue. How is it here in the States? People prefer investing in company that has already revenue, or whatever in the future going to be bought by another company as well. It's great.
I think it's both, right? Because I think, as Greg talked about, gaining a round of investment for 18 months. 18 months of what? Right? 18 months of hitting milestones that demonstrate that you can grow revenue, that you are capturing revenue, you're capturing market share, et cetera. So the intentionality is all around your ability to grow and demonstrate that you can achieve growth milestones and expectations that allow the investor to achieve returns. So I think it could be both. I think it also depends on people's perspective, investors' perspective on how they measure critical milestones, and how those critical milestones at some point in time result in a growth trajectory that will result in, again, returns on my investment.
Thank you.
So I like that's actually a good question, because it kind of leads into what are the attributes that angels are looking for in startups, right? So you mentioned, being able to capture market share. There's a sort of a growth trajectory in terms of revenue, but from the point of view of teams, potential market size, disruptive technology and ideas, et cetera, right? Customer traction. What is it that really rings the bell for an angel investor when they're speaking to a founder that gets them to say, hey, listen, this is something that was really worth my attention?
There's a lot there.
Yeah, there is a lot.
I want to start, so I'll hit on a few of these. So let's talk about the team and specifically the founder. First of all, you got to be committed to this. This can't be your side thing, right? I don't want to invest in your hobby. Because I know how it is that even if you're like, look, there's nothing wrong with a side hustle, and in that being how you get started. Just don't ask someone to invest in that, right? Because it's hard. You get busy at work, your family, whatever. Like, progress only happens at a certain rate on that, because it's going to be number 3 on your priority list, or it should be, right? your first priorities ought to be your first two would be your family, right? Whatever that is. And also what pays your bills, right? So if the side hustle just isn't going to move forward at the pace that's going to make an investor happy. So you got to be committed to it. You got to have some. I need to believe if I'm investing really early stage, I need to see some attribute in that founder that makes me, I believe he can make this happen. Right? So what could that be? It could be that you really know this industry, that you have been, I would like it if you've been in and around startups, so sort of understand that feel and that how to build a business. And I gotta, ultimately I just gotta, because there's not enough at that early stage, there's not enough to the business. It's really more about the person, right? Or the person or that core team. And do I think these are the people? That might be a great idea, but if these people can't make it work, the idea isn't going to build itself, right? So they might have the greatest idea in the world, but can these people make it happen? I also want, this could sound fun when it's just overly focused on founders. I want founders who can tell the story, because you have to get a lot of people on board with you to make your business work. You have to get investors, you have to get employees, you have to get customers, but you've got to be able to tell that story in a compelling way, right? To get people on the bus with you, right? So can you tell that story in a way that engages other people? I think is really important. You'll get to other things like, hey, investors will prefer that you have some sort of, what you'll hear people talk about a moat, right? Which is sort of like, what gives you an advantage? What keeps somebody else from just starting the same doggone business? It could be a patent. It could be, it could be certain relationships that you have with customers or vendors. It could be how your team itself could be a part of the moat, but what is it that differentiates this business from others who would intend, because you're going to have competitors, right? So what is it that's going to enable these people to maintain that defensible position? Now, where do you want to go from there?
The only thing I'd add is you mentioned early on about teams that they're already kind of building traction, etc. I got to say, there have been founders where, again, it's the choice of why as an angel investor involved. Well, we've invested. I personally have invested where I really thought this person was experienced, knowledgeable, had a decent plan, and I just wanted them to start. We want them to start. And I wanted to start so that they could start to get engaged in doing the work. So it is not a side hustle, but it becomes a business that they really can go. So I explicitly have engaged people with side hustles because I wanted them to start, to go faster. But at some point in time, and that's more like friends and family more than anything else. That's really strategy. They were friends, I guess. I'm not even friends anymore. They were friends, I guess. So all that being said, what Greg said is so important. It's really about, when you really start to get to the stage of angel investing with parameters that matter, the things we talked about. The credibility of the founder matters. Do they have experience with what they're doing? Do they have a team? One person is okay. A team is better for a lot of reasons. That's the whole dynamic in itself, even maintaining a team, but it says it's good things sometimes. And the ability to really demonstrate how efficiently and effectively you could run this. So experience in the space, probably a team, and can you do this? And can you do it efficiently? And not consume, burn, the resources.
100%. So there's nothing. Sorry to interrupt you, but you can't. So, and somebody pitched me their thing today. They haven't started it yet, right? They haven't started. It's an idea and some sketches as to what they want the screens of this software to look like, right? And they want to raise some money. The first 150,000 they want to use to hire a CTO. Like, you know what? Here's the deal. Find a co-founder who can write some software, right? Or but like you can't go. Here's the thing. So you might. I've heard all the time. Well, like so and so isn't in a position to take a lower than market rate salary because they got 3 kids in private school or whatever they got, right? The thing is, that person isn't in a position to be in a startup. They just aren't. And you're not in a position to pay $150,000 a year for a chief technology officer, right? And if that's honestly what that told me is, this is an entrepreneur who isn't far enough along in their journey, right? To if they think they just they need money to start, I need to be, hey, wages are high. I got to start giving everybody 6-figure salaries and whatever. Like they're not going to get there, right? There's got to be some hustle to it, right? And you got to have people, your key people need to be in it with you, right? Honestly, if that person, let's say you desperately need a programmer or a chief technology, you need somebody to build this thing. You need to find somebody who's is as committed to this as you are. And
Sales job number one.
man, I want to be in this thing. But the person who says, yeah, pay me $150,000 a year and I'll come to work for you. That's not the person who's going to be there with you 60 hours a week or whatever it takes. And is going to, when things aren't working great, is going to be with you there, going to be there with you nights and weekends. And, when the bank account gets a little low, that person who insists on 150 grand a year is going to say, this is getting a little too risky for me. Right.
The question that you ought to be asking yourself is, would you, if you had the resources, invest in that, right? And I think that's even before you approach an investor, you would ask yourself, well, would I invest in that based on the rationale that Mr. Wong gave?
Well, Greg already alluded to it, and this is part of this engagement in ecosystem resources. It's a journey. So are you far enough along in the journey in order to be ready, prepared in order to engage investors? And Greg, I'd imagine the person today may not be far enough
along,
Okay.
right? To figure out that, hey, that's just not going to be the path.
Well, that now kind of segues into this question. Idea stage or seed stage or, pre-revenue startup early stage, right? Now, let's say if you were to take a percentage, what percentage of your angel fund would you invest in an idea versus a seed stage versus a sort of not, and seed, we can talk about that being pre-revenue or an early stage.
So I think you're going to get to. I think what you asked, which is fair, I think is a personal perspective question.
Yes.
Right. So for me, I am more risk tolerant than Charlotte Angel Fund is as a group. So I would probably be willing, of whatever bucket of money I'm willing to say that's what I would invest in angel investing. I probably would be willing to go probably 20% free product, right? Means they don't have that thing. If it's a product company, they need to build it, right? They don't have it available for the market yet. Another 20% probably post product, but maybe pre or just no meaningful revenue, right? But they've proven they can build something. And the remaining 60% somewhere, now we're going different slices post revenue.
Gotcha.
would be kind of where.
Yeah.
Maybe how I would view it.
I think you're right. I think we probably are more risk tolerant than many, because I was gonna, my point, I was thinking about how I've actually acted. And I would say that outside of the funds, probably more than 10 to 15, not 20%, but
Yeah.
10, maybe up to 20%. And ideas, people. And people with ideas who I really believed should move forward. And that's mostly small because it should be small. Because the intent is to move them so they get to the next stage so we can have a better conversation. So I don't think a low percentage is a necessarily terrible thing in the lower stages, because you want them to start and then get to a stage where they're along the journey farther enough so you're willing to do more, invest more.
Question as far as pre-stages and asking investors for money. Ideally, you're looking for returns as investors. And when I go to a lot of sites, they typically ask for a multiple of sales after a certain while, right? So as an entrepreneur that's wanting to, I guess, put their company in the right position, how do you suggest they create reasonable sales projections to get to, I guess, that exit strategy that the investors are looking for?
I would give maybe 1.5 answers. So the first thing I would give you is, it's all depends on the industry, obviously, right? So I think the demonstration to investors and to yourself about how will you generate revenue, that starts to at the right, timing. And this we are, how will you generate that revenue? And at what key milestones can prove that your assumptions about generating revenue are real? So that builds two things for me. That builds confidence that, hey, you said you're going to get 10 sales in the first month. Did you get 10 or you get 2? You got 2, why? Do you know why and how you get to that certain stage? If you got 12 instead of 10, you said, so how did that happen? Was that an accident, or did you actually know what you're doing? So I think there's certain kind of expectations about your knowledge of the business and your ability to demonstrate achievement of milestones that leads to demonstration of activity milestones that lead to demonstration of revenue milestones that get us more confident in your ability to generate revenue over time. So a lot of this about investing in journals about the future. How do you know? What should we believe to be true, right? And I can only believe to be true what you demonstrate in the near term about milestones, opportunity for revenue, delivery of that revenue, and the belief that you're going to grow that revenue.
Yeah. And oftentimes,
That's 3 things. I'm sorry.
oftentimes, what we see, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, is that someone will have an idea and then an accompanying business plan, right? And not necessarily have a business, but an idea, business plan, and now they're looking for investment so that they can start the business versus having taken that idea out and tested it in the marketplace to see whether or not you're going to get some traction, and that traction shows up in people are willing to pay for this. If they're willing to pay for it, then you're maybe onto something, right? And then you can craft a business model around that you can then say, all right, here's what customers are saying, here's how we're going to make money. That is potentially a more compelling kind of argument to an investor than, here's my, I spent a lot of time on this business plan. It's about 60 pages here, by the way.
59 pages.
Yeah, so you touched on something. So honestly, I would not invest in an idea state, that 20% I said I would do early. I would not invest if someone hadn't done customer discovery work.
Yeah.
So what's customer discovery work? It means go talk to the types of people who you want to have as customers and get their feedback. Would this interest them? All that. So that's so important. Venture runs a great program on that, by the way. The mistake a lot of business owners make is they assume that they are typical of the market. A lot of businesses start, somebody will say, you know, I had a need for something and I couldn't find it in the market. So I decided I had to go build it. Well, let me give you an example. So let's imagine I'm fanatical about my silverware drawer, fanatical, right? I'm willing to spend $1,000 for a custom silverware drawer organizer because I need it a certain way, right? And there wasn't one out there, so I had to hire some craftsmen to build it. And I say, you know what? I've got to build a company to do this. Well, what mistake have I made? I assume I'm normal, right? And there's going to be a lot of people who want there has to be a lot of people who want custom silverware drawer organizers. Well, I should go to the mall and talk to 100 people and say, what's the most you would spend on a silverware drawer organizer? And nobody's going to say $1,000, right? So that's customer discovery work. Figure out, is there really a market for this thing before you start spending money building it, or you need to hear the market.
All right, absolutely, absolutely. Do we want to take a bit of a bio break, or you want to keep on going?
Keep going.
Why don't we take, let's take 5.
Okay.
All righty. So we're gonna continue to move along with the conversation here. And one of the questions I wanted to ask is, and you talked about, well, what might be the runway that you're looking for with a company that you invest in? So, there's I guess, a 5 to 7 year horizon of that you.
That'd be a kind of a reasonable thing to think about in terms of time to get to an exit.
Right. But typically for the founder, and there's no typical, but often how long does it take to go through the angel fundraising process? Right? What kind of expectations might the founder have on first contact with an angel investor to them writing a check typically?
How does it work for you as an, I can speak about it institutionally, but what?
I have a small sample size of my personal experiences, and I would say that a founder who I eventually invested in individually, it probably took 2 years. The first time we spoke, I said, "This is terrible. Why would I ever do this? I usually don't think about this." The second time we talked, he said there were feedback, improvements, etc. Fast forward a number of different months, kind of making contact, having dialogue, getting feedback, and got to a point where I strongly believe this person was capable, consistent, delivering milestones, also we talked about, and it was about 2 years. I'm not saying that's typical, but it was from early stage, I don't like this, to that's interesting, sounds like you're moving in the right direction, right?
Walt describes something that I think is important, is rate of progress. So when I think as an investor, if I meet a company and they might say, here's where I'm at in terms of I have this much revenue, this many customers, blah, 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 blah. But I'm not so much interested in what your company is today, but what it's going to be in the future. And what can tell me a lot about that is understanding how you've gotten to there. And so what Walt described is being engaged with someone over time and being able to see progress and sort of approach to different, they hit the wall, how did they,
And
ran into roadblock, how did they work around it, all that kind of stuff.
These milestones weren't necessarily significant revenue milestones, but did you deliver on the thing that you talked about? What you want from it? Hey, let's do something with that. Great hearing that. Let me know your progress going forward. And it probably could have come earlier, but the right time was right timing. But yeah, I think that's true. That keeping about relationship again. Keeping relationships that we are demonstrating integrity, we are demonstrating that we're hitting milestones, we're demonstrating that we can gut this thing out for 5 to 7 years at least in order to deliver a return that is really based on confidence in the ability of the team.
Now, I would say, I would guess you probably have more rigor about that than some other angel investors would, right? There'd be others who would be a little bit more just sort of impulsive about that decision, right? I think that's a little bit your nature. And I don't say that in a negative way. It's just others would say, I met this guy at breakfast today. I really liked him. I think I'm going to give him some money. I can think of a couple guys in our group.
That's not me.
So, it can go all the way from, hey, I had breakfast with him and I had money by 3 p.m., man. I don't know. To actually the guy that I went to work for was a bit like that. He would call me and it made me nervous, but he would say, I met this guy on a plane today. I need you to send a wire. What? But I'd like something from you saying you want me to send him some of your money. Yeah, I don't know what he told you on that plane, but you know,
I will say that I've met a couple, one of them, I was leaning into it, but the timing didn't work out. That I said, yeah, that's incredible and you're incredible.
Yeah.
Let's figure this out. So there are those moments.
yeah. So for now, we are more structured
As a fund.
as a fund,
Okay, yeah.
right? So our group, it would be, you're probably talking about 90 to 120 days from when you meet me or meet my colleague Camille to go through the process to receive money from Charlotte Angel Fund. So
If at all.
if at all, right? So if you meet me and say, hey, Greg, I need some money from Charlotte Angel Fund because I need some cash to make payroll on Friday. We don't have that won't, even if I desperately wanted to, I couldn't do that with the institution's money.
Sure. So let's get into some, little more nitty gritty here. Talk about preferred shares. And do you as angel investors, and I almost know the answer, but are you typically dealing with preferred shares? And explain what that is for those of us that don't know. When you are taking an equity stake versus are you in the option pool? Are you in the, the common stock pool? Where do you fall?
So
What are preferred?
you said, so we'll work through some definitions.
Right.
So shares means is a unit of ownership, right? Think of pieces of pie, right? And you could cut that pie into 4 pieces. You cut that pie. You could theoretically cut it into 1 million pieces. They're really small ones, but so it's just a share is a fraction of the total, right? So you heard Henry refer to common shares and preferred shares. Those are those are categories of shares or types of shares that just have different attributes. You can call them A and B, you can call them left and right, you can call them, but just generally they're referred to as common and preferred. And so that the shares could have different rights. For example, so investors are typically going to have something called preferred shares, and you're going to have something called common shares as a founder. It might be that, hey, we agree that the board of directors of this company, 2 of the directors are going to be elected by the common shareholders and 1 is going to be elected by the preferred shareholders, right? So there are different attributes, right? Your common shares have certain voting rights with regard to who sits on the board, and our preferred shares have other. It doesn't mean yours are better or worse. They're different, right? So there are certain attributes that investors are going to have with their shares that are going to require that they be in a different category from yours, right? So we'll have the preferred label for that reason, to be able to set up different, whether it's differences about voting rights or any number of different attributes.
And there are economic implications of those rights, right? So in terms of
Sure.
percentages, in terms of all those.
Yeah. So here's the basic deal. So the preferred shareholders are almost always going to have something that says they get all their money back before you get anything. Right? Almost always. So, and I mean, think about it, that's sort of fair, right? So let's say I put $1 million in your business for 20% ownership. And you sell the business for $2.5 million. Right? So 20% of 2.5 million would be 500,000. So if we didn't have that thing where I get my money back first, you'd walk away with 2 million and I lost $500,000, which doesn't feel right. Right? So believe it or not, that doesn't feel right. So it doesn't feel like how it should work. So it's it's ensuring, okay, the investors aren't gonna lose money and see the founders walking away with money, right? So it creates some sort of justice in that relationship.
And, I know we can't really do a deep dive on this, but let's touch on valuation. Let's talk about valuation. Because valuation gets to a place where you understand what your preferred shares are ultimately going to be worth and what those common shares are worth, right? And then we can also talk about dilution. So
Which one of those concepts do you want to take? And what do you want to find?
I want most of it. Dilution is the one is really important for investors in terms of kind of where you are in terms of your participation throughout the life cycle. So that's when it's really important that as an investor, you make decisions and structure your deal makes a difference.
Yeah, so think about dilution. So think about that pie, right? So we might agree so let's say this is a first transaction and you're going to give the investors 20%. So we got to cut that pie into 5 pieces, right? Okay, 5 pieces. Now, a couple years go by, we need some more money. Walt's going to put money in. And he says, I need a certain amount of area of that pie. Well, now the dilution is we all got to give up some pie, right? To create enough space for the area of the pie that he's demanding for his money, right? So our slices are getting smaller now, right? That's dilution. We're having to give up some of our piece of this pie that we like to him.
We gotta ask the question, so why would anybody ever do that, right? And it's gotta be about the expectation of growth. The pie size, the pie distribution is narrower, but the size of the pie is expected to grow.
Yeah, presumably, that's the whole point. If that isn't happening, it's a huge problem. Yeah. We're all getting hungry. Yeah,
So then that kind of, that bleeds into valuation.
yeah.
So how do you determine, especially with a, pre-revenue company, how do you make a reasonable assessment of that?
So valuation.
And they're different kinds of formulas.
So the first thing I'm going to tell you is it's very subjective at these early stages, right? It's more emotionally driven than I got a big spreadsheet out and calculate it. And you'll if you go online and you say, I want a spreadsheet that helps me, you'll find some things that do some crazy math for you, but don't spend any time on that at this stage. And here's the other thing, valuation implies something that isn't true. Your business is not today worth what this valuation number. If it is, you ought to just sell your business today for that and go make some more PowerPoint slides for your next idea. Right? Your best idea. So, but it's a method of doing some math that really gets to what percentage of the business am I going to own? Right? So, if I'm going to put $1 million, and when we talk about valuation, what we're really saying is, what are we going to agree is the relative value of your business before the investor's money comes into it? So let's say that the investor is going to put in $1 million and you've agreed that they're going to get 20%, right? You might have that handshake deal. So all right, they're getting $1 million for 20%. What's the value? Anybody know what the valuation of that?
5 million.
Yeah, 5 million, what would we say, post money, post money. Because if I get 20% for my million, the whole pie is $5 million in size. So your pre-money valuation was 4, and post money it's 5, right? It's just math. So it doesn't mean that you could sell your business for that. It's a way of getting to what percentage ownership am I getting? And as your business matures, it's a little easier to determine valuation with some precision, right? Because there are certain market norms about businesses are worth a certain multiple of revenue or a certain multiple of cash flow or whatever that is, but you don't have any of that today, right? So it's all, you know, it's all just going to be subjective, right? Because there's no, how do you put zeros into that spreadsheet, right? Because you don't have, like, I don't have any revenue, I don't have any customers, I haven't built a product yet, right? There's no spreadsheet that's going to come out and say you're worth $3 million. It's going to be subjective.
But so, you know, all of us have watched Shark Tank, and they will talk about value,
Yeah.
right? Valuation, you know, and then use that, to your point, as a determinant on how much of this business are we going to.
But they're not saying I want to own 20%, but I promise you in their head, they're doing the, if I'm putting in $1 million, if I agree to invest $1 million in your business at a valuation of 3 million pre-money, I know in my head I'm getting 25%. Right? That's really what they're doing. Right? They're not talking in terms of, they're not speaking in terms of percentage of ownership, but that the valuation number and how much money they're putting in does the math that determines how much they're going to get.
Process that.
Yeah.
Anti-dilution, does that ever happen?
So there are various forms of, so concept. Anti-dilution is a concept that means someone's share doesn't diminish. Which means, so let's think back our earlier example, when Walt comes in, if I have anti-dilution rights, you give up all the pie to make him happy, right? I don't give any up. If you have so it does happen, it's a terrible thing, right? It totally gets us out of alignment. If I agree with you, I'm going to put money in your business, but I get anti-dilution rights. Like, I want you to, like, I will never say you shouldn't take on that extra money, right? Because it's all coming out of your pocket. Sure, take that deal. Take Henry's money. Right? So we're out of alignment, right? Because none of that costs me anything. In fact, I'm better for every dollar that goes into the business. And likewise, you shouldn't have any special dilution protection either, right? So it does happen. If an investor is asking you for that, they are either predatory or don't have experience in the space.
I never saw how that made sense, so that's why I want to ask.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just brought up something it's a question I meant to ask you earlier, but that is vetting angel investors, right? Because you just brought up predatory, right? And so not every angel investor is an angel. You know? So what should the founder do in order to do their due diligence relative to that angel, right? Because I mean, you guys are good guys, you know, but hey, listen.
Ooh, so the way it's similar to what we said about being involved in the community, right? Being engaged in these organizations, these events, these activities, expand your network, being open to conversations about, yourself and others. I use it as a founder and investors and other investors, and just I think really being very attuned to the ecosystem. It becomes pretty clear, not always, but in the ecosystem, bad players, start to demonstrate themselves, and people start to know who they are. So I think being involved, engaged, showing up, being open to dialogue, meeting people, building, expanding relationship, that's a part of it. And also taking some time to this wouldn't happen until you probably got more serious in the relationship. Where you would have a reason to believe that you need to understand a little more about their person's background and how they've operated and how they've made their money and all that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah. So I think you can't, so with this would be, what I'm about to say would be a little bit awkward with an individual.
Yeah.
But for Charlotte Angel Fund, let's say we were going to invest in your business. It would be fair for you to say, hey, Greg, can I pick 3 companies out of your portfolio and talk to the founders? Right? Not 3 that I'm going to hand you, because guess what? Those would be just like an employment reference, right? They're going to speak well of me, right? Because I can find 3 out of the 30 that like me. But, but you should be like, sure, here's the list, pick 3, talk to other founders, right? Hey, have you had any experience with these folks? What was that experience like? But I would tell you, have an understanding that the investor may have declined to invest in their business, but that doesn't mean they're a bad investor. Right? They asked me a lot of hard questions and whatever, and then I didn't end up getting any money. Well, that's part of their job to ask some questions to figure out, well, what are really the merits of this thing. I think if you have an opportunity to speak with some founders who've had experience, and you could probably get 1 or 2 of those from an individual angel. I wouldn't expect an individual angel to be willing to say, here's a list of all my angel investments. I think that's a bit much, but I think with an organized group, that's fair.
I think I think that's fine, right? I think a little due diligence, being smart. I mean, a lot of ways to do that. So. Yeah.
So, we're going to get to the Charlotte Angel Fund now. And so tell us a little more about the organization. And then, Walt, I want you to kind of lean in on being a Black tech or a Black angel investor and what that has meant for you and how you've been able to kind of walk in that space. So great, tell us more about
So Charlotte Angel Fund, so what I'm about to describe to you is pretty typical about how an organized angel investor group works. There's a monthly meeting. People physically or virtually come together. The members do. There are companies that present who, in the case of Charlotte Angel Fund, is me, but in any organization, someone who's organizing this activity has met some companies, invites them to come and present to the members. In our case, it's 3 per month. So 3 companies come, they give their presentation, there are some questions, and then ultimately our members express opinion about those companies. And this opinion isn't we should invest or we shouldn't, is it a good use of everyone's time for us to really dig in here? Is it a good use of the entrepreneur's time and of our time? Because we don't, at that point, a 10-minute presentation and 10 minutes of questions, we don't know nearly enough to invest, right? We might know enough to say no way, but we don't know enough to say yes. So members express some preference. Maybe we decide one of the 3 companies we're going to dig in on. So then we spend some more time with the company. Ultimately, I get some volunteers to help. Ultimately, the members make a decision whether they vote. Should we invest in this company? And, if so, we do. We're typically investing. We're no one's sole investor, and we don't want to be that. So we're investing with other groups like ours and individuals. We might be 20% of the total capital raise.
and typically the
Something
size
like
of the size of the investment.
So that we're typically writing, smallest check we've ever written was $50,000. We're writing $50,000 to $250,000 checks as a part of a $500,000 to $2 million capital raise. And there are exceptions to all that, but middle of the bell curve stuff. And what I just described is a very pretty much any group, any organized group of angel investors in the Carolinas pretty much runs that same way. So that's how we have no we have no definition of we only invest in this type of business. So we have a pretty broad, we're more geographically focused than sector focused. And kind
And
of,
by that, do you mean Charlotte? Because I think the Angel Fund has at least had some notoriety around not investing. in
yeah, so
Charlotte.
here's the favoritism that we play. We overrepresent Charlotte companies in terms of who gets in front of the members. We don't have any sort of, from there, the members are making decisions about where they want to deploy their capital. So the community thing I'm doing is making sure that Charlotte startups are overrepresented in terms of getting that audience. From there, they have to earn it, right? And they're competing with companies from Durham, from Atlanta, from wherever, right? So they can't just be the best company in Mecklenburg County. They got, right? Well, if you're the best company in Mecklenburg County, it'd be pretty good, right? You probably would get some money. But the point is, you're competing more broadly from that. So there are some people who's, look, Charlotte Angel Fund should be investing in more Charlotte-based companies. I wish we were, right? I wish there were so many awesome startups in Charlotte that we could construct a 30 company portfolio and feel like we could have above average returns. But, the fact is we're putting them in front of the members are making choices there. And I promise you, if everything were equal, two companies are equal, they're going to choose the Charlotte company. If everything's equal, they're going to choose a female founder. If everything's equal, they're going to choose an underrepresented founder, right? There's some community spirit and purpose, but of course, no two companies are ever identical. So it's so super easy for Greg to say, right? Harder to evaluate in practice.
Yeah. So as a member of Charlotte Angel Fund, I'd say that couple things stand out for me. One is that the importance of the community of investors coming together to make decisions, right? You have a lot of different perspectives, a lot of different maturity levels in terms of the space, different perspectives on the industry. So you get an opportunity to hear from others about kind of what do they think. And that's really important because no one knows everything. And it doesn't become a place where we're only doing technology, fintech startups, we're only doing product, consumer products startups. We have a sense of those that meet a lot of the criteria that Greg sort of laid out, but they can be in different industries, different states, et cetera. The key though is that that group of investors coming together and sharing perspectives that really gets us to a better point of view about our willingness to invest. That sometimes makes us probably less risk averse, because I should say more risk averse, more risk averse, because you have a smoothing of the line, a smoothing of the curve in terms of people's willingness to act.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I would say, and the group is an important and valuable thing. I think in the 8 years of Sharp, so we have 3 companies present per month, so that's 36 per year times 8 years. We've got about 300 companies in front of the group. I'll bet there's never been a company present to Charlotte Angel Fund's membership where there wasn't more than one of our members who knew more about that industry than I do.
not only
Right?
that,
They know, like there's somebody in this room of 150 people who's an expert in whatever that thing is.
and it's like if they're from Charlotte, someone in the room also knows the company, right? And can be engaged in that. So that comes back to, being engaged in the community as well. So the second thing I was going to call out was, the portfolio as a whole. There's the portfolio is limited, constrained by the amount of capital that's available to deploy. So we are being very smart about, how we deploy that capital on a go-forward basis. So I think that fact also leads to the fact that a founder, a company should not only be looking at Charlotte Angel Fund. You should be looking at many other funds, many other investors to support your capital raising needs.
Yeah, definitely.
And then the last question, and then we'll open it up to just a couple of things. Yeah,
I got one of that.
Yeah, yeah.
As far as the angel fund, what is the due diligence process like?
So we start with a document request. So we would send you a Word document, say, please provide us with these things like, hey, your financial projections. Send us the bios of the people on your team. Maybe write a paragraph for us about your marketing strategy. Right, so it's some combination of things you, I'm sure, already have, and just sort of, tell us about this, right? What do you view as your primary competitive advantage? Things like that. So we would ask for some information, you send it, right? Then we have a meeting so we have, let's say, 5 people from our group who volunteered to be on that due diligence committee. And we're reviewing, asking questions about what you submitted, asking, for clarification or things that, hey, we forgot to ask, whatever. And what our members are doing in that meeting is seeking the additional information that they feel like they need in order to have an informed opinion, right, about this. So that's the process. I will tell you that it's more, I've been advised that ours is more rigorous than the average angel investor group, which I don't necessarily take as, I don't necessarily take as disparaging us. Right? I think some rigor is appropriate.
Yeah, and it's important for, expectations of the members, how, we're not doing this every day, full time. So having some level of rigor and some level of screening that gets us to a few that we're paying attention to matters. And you looked at hundreds of companies. So your point of view about kind of what did you do? That's the first pass. Really doesn't matter.
So, last question about you and your perspective as a Black angel investor. And, is there anything about being a brother doing this that we ought to take into consideration? Or is it, hey, listen, I'm an investor who happens to be Black? We oftentimes hear that, right?
Yeah, so I've been given 2s and 3s. I'm just gonna say, so I think this first and foremost is that at the beginning, we said clearly that the reason that people do this, are involved in angel investing, it can't be just for the purpose of investing. There are a lot of ways to invest, and you can make a lot of money in a lot of different ways. It's got to be, in my perspective, a reason that you want to be involved in personally and economically, financially investing in the ecosystem and of entrepreneurship, not just in entrepreneurship. You believe in entrepreneurship, this whole thing that you're all going through to create companies that other people don't do. So for me, as an African American man, growing up in the South, having been a lot of different places and being fortunate, I, for me personally, believe in what entrepreneurs do. And I believe in the fact that that has been demonstrated that entrepreneurs, small business owners, great jobs, great economic mobility, great economic opportunity, and especially in underserved communities, Black and brown communities in particular, that it becomes really important for that to be a part of the pathway to economic mobility and to wealth. So I think that's a part of how I see my personal mission. I'll see the word personal engagement to be a part of that. And I think this again, entrepreneurship for in communities that are underserved, underrepresented, underinvested in is an important part of what we do. So the last thing I'll say, I am an investor in Black, so I do want my money. So I have a high expectation, and this is true. I have a high expectation that folks who I've personally engaged with, and that's why I love Charlotte Angel Fund. I love the other, can I mention the other groups?
Yeah, of course.
So I love Charlotte Angel Fund. I work, I have a invested in Venture South and NC Idea Partners, NC Partners, what do you call them? NC Partners.
Idea fund.
Idea Fund Partners, I guess it's
Yeah.
Idea Fund Partners. So these groups do different things. The reason I like them and I like them differently is because they give different exposure based on where they are. Idea Fund Partners is in Durham, but they also are very invested in North Carolina and technology in general. And I've talked to John and other guys there that they're invested in their communities, right? So they pay attention. Same thing for Charlotte Angel Fund, invested in the community. And Venture South around investing in community, especially different types of businesses. So I say all that because the community matters. And people, a lot of ways to make money and a lot of easier ways than kind of reading all those reports and talking to people all the time and all that kind of thing. But we're invested in communities and invested in people, you, and invested in entrepreneurship as a pathway to improve our community as well. So that's what I need to ask.
Thank you. Thank you. Listen, we're dealing with the tyranny of the clock, so I want to throw it open to a couple of questions.
Yeah, quick one.
Yes.
Actually, you just gave me a new one. So, yeah.
Yeah. Question.
So, so one for you and one for you. The one you just gave me, when going to the pitch, when going into the pitch for your company to get the investment, how deterring, I guess is the word, how detrimental is it to be pitching a company that is specific to a particular demographic? So does it hurt or is it helpful? To say something like, my company is to help increase equity and representation in the BIPOC community. Like, does that hurt or does it?
So I'm gonna unpack the description you gave, right?
Okay.
And part of this whole thing we've been talking about is about coming to these the pitch, the description of your business model, and its ability to be involved, engaged in a market space, an industry, a business model that has potential to grow and scale. So the way you describe that growth and scale is about the market space. It's a BIPOC market, the largest growing markets in the country anyways. How does it align with what you say in terms of the market itself? You said growing economic mobility in this market. So to me, I said, what does that mean? What does that mean to me in terms of your ability to generate revenue? So I think there's got to be a sense of how are you describing the business and how you describe that segmentation, the segment of the business, the segment of the total market space. That may be a segment that is multicultural, maybe a segment that's not multicultural, but your ability to describe that market space, define the size of that market, define the growth trajectory of that market, and how you are going to capture it through certain milestones would matter. So, no, having very segmentation is a good thing. Being able to articulate how you're going to grow the business is the second part.
All right, thank you. Very nice. I mean, Greg, is it possible to? Is it possible to have in the contract with angel investors the ability to buy them out instead of selling the company? Has that ever been?
Yeah, sure. So sometimes there's what's called a redemption clause, which might mean that, and it's usually a right that the investor has to where, hey, look, Henry, I invest in your business. You know, it's been 7 years. We haven't we haven't achieved an exit. The investor might have the right to require the company to repurchase their shares. Not it usually wouldn't be an automatic thing. It's usually a right the investor has to be able to. But when I say it's usually, it's not in, most deals don't have a redemption feature. When they do, it's the investor has the right to put that into play.
The reason,
Say, I've been in this deal a long time, man, and I know you're having fun running the company and everything, but yeah.
but is it possible to sit down and have a conversation of, well, maybe I'll just cut you a check for 20% on top of what you put in, and then the angel investor agrees to go ahead and just let you have their piece of the pie.
I mean, it's always possible to negotiate and agree to whatever later, right? I mean, if I invest in your company, we may not have any of that in our documents, but you could come back to me 6 months from now and say, hey, if I gave you a 25% bump on top of your money, could I buy your shares today?
Yes.
Maybe. Yeah, I'd be thinking, he knows something.
He knows
that I don't know.
How about this? I think
Any other questions here? Yes, yes, true. Ladies first.
Would you mind walking us through the funding stages from like early stage all the way until?
Ooh.
Wow,
We could be here. How much time we got?
So so continue. I think about it as a series of lily pads, right? And you don't necessarily have to land on each of these. Right? So the first lily pad, like the earliest stage stuff, you'll usually talk friends and family, right? You hear people talk about friends and family. That, and the concept here is you don't even really have a business yet, right? And you got, so people are investing in you, right? Because of you, your relationship with you, like they may or may not be financially motivated at this stage. Like I might invest in my son's business at this stage. Walt would never, right? Because I'm doing it because I love him and, you know, I want to see him have a chance at something. And so I'll buy a truck for him or whatever it is, right? I'm now a friends and family investor. Then you would typically have angel investors, right? Those are, again, folks investing their own money. You'd have venture capitalists as kind of the next lily pad, which would be they're investing money that has been entrusted to them by high net worth individuals, institutions to invest on their behalf.
This is where you see the Series A.
So yeah, you'll hear, this is Series A, Series B funding, where you'll hear of something called private equity, which is just, so structured like a venture capital firm, but typically investing later stage. It typically investing in companies that have achieved profitability, typically. Those would be what I would suggest that you think of as kind of the primary lily pads. And again, some might jump from friends and family to venture capital. Some may never do friends and family or angel investors because maybe the founders have some capital or whatever. So they start this business, what they call bootstrapping, right? Which means,
Which I encourage.
yeah, get as far as you can without somebody else's money, right? But they may never do the first couple and just do venture capital, right? Because now they need 10 million and sort of, hey, we were able to come up with $1 million between us to start this thing, but you know, now we need 10 and that's a little beyond what we can do ourselves.
Phenomenal, thank you.
Are any of you affiliated with the SCORE, SCOR, the people who
Yeah.
actually sit back and, you know, you can go and make an appointment and they can give you like suggestions?
Familiar, yeah, yeah. No,
I
we've
mean,
worked
I
with
know
SCORE.
affiliated
We've worked with SCORE.
You do, okay.
We've worked with them.
The second thing I have to ask is pertaining to the type of business setup. You know, there are different ones, you have sole proprietor, you have LLC, you have S corporation, what have you. Do y'all have a personal preference, either anybody up there, for a particular type of business formation, like you prefer, you don't even touch sole proprietor, which is what I am, or you don't touch LLC or any other thing, you know? Do y'all deal with?
You want to answer that as a, from an individual perspective, and I'll speak about it
I think about it two
institutionally.
ways. I think about it. One is that as a sole proprietor, that oftentimes may indicate the scale of the business to some degree, as well as not necessarily having in place some of the legal structures that might be more attractive for folks. So I personally would say that probably would have less interest in a sole provider.
You
I
want
would- I
something
would.
that's protected like an LLC, with
Uh,
your personal asset is.
Yeah, but LLC still, you can have an individual partner of an LLC, so, or a single partner LLC. So I think that as the business as the business gets more sophisticated and gets larger and requires different structures, it just makes it very important that legally that you've got
Protected personal asset.
well, you got the right structure that fits your current stage
Mhm.
and fits the protectors that you and I need in order to move forward. So that's generally, but most of the folks I've invested, I think of them, LLCs probably. Most of them.
Probably, yeah, I would
Yeah,
guess.
most of all
Now, once you
LLCs.
get institutionally, they're probably,
That's
so
CRS, right?
they're gonna probably require that you be a C corporation. Because they don't want to deal with pass-through tax things.
Which would be the S corp as well.
Yeah, so we wouldn't want an S corp partnership, we would want a C corporation.
We investing in industries that are atypical, like, is it possible that angels would invest in food versus just consumer goods, tech, fintech?
Yeah, so we made an investment in a healthy snack food. For example, so now that's atypical for us. But we did invest in such a company.
What about the other parameters, though? Growth and structure, so.
Yeah, so that was, so we felt like that, so we invested in the brand. Right, so we wouldn't have invested in a food manufacturer, right? Because the brand, think about, so the brand, they're gonna hire somebody to do, someone else is actually gonna produce the product and all that sort of thing. So we probably wouldn't have invested in the manufacturing company that's making their healthy snack food, but the brand itself, when you think about it, so there are not, that's a pretty scalable business, a brand.
When I think about it, and this is getting more insight from a trajectory perspective, I think like over the last year, most have been about 9% revenue, 9 times revenue. So is that something like that's an attractive range? Like you said, you can go in different industries. Yeah, is that considered attractive, not just by you all, but in the industry? Why is that something that angels just kind of stay away from, that is too small?
No, so so first of all, for the group, what he's referring to is, I'm pretty sure, 9 times, so you'll hear people talk about valuation as a multiple of revenue. So he's referring to, I think valuation multiples being 9 times revenue in a certain industry. So there's nothing about 9 times revenue as an industry multiple that makes it inappropriate for an angel investor, right? Like software, your average software revenue probably multiple would be 10. Yeah. So 9 is a perfectly acceptable,
But it's
revenue
relative to,
multiple.
it's relative to what the multiple, the expected industry multiple, right? So if you're, if software is 10% and you're at 6%, I'm sorry, it's 10%, the multiple is 10%. And, a lot of reasons your expected valuation is lower than that, might be
Yeah.
because of debt, might be because of, growth rates, might be a number of things. That becomes problematic, but it's really about, the expected multiple for the industry. And you're demonstrating all the relative financial benchmarks and growth benchmarks of the industry.
Compound and growing at the industry, compound growth rate, stuff like that. So you got different KPIs.
Yeah, we're talking about, first, we're talking about base stuff, it's not, cash flow and debt and growth in terms of units of sales, all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
So I think we're gonna have to put a pin in this.
Yeah.
Quick question,
Yes,
but one second, for Brave, do y'all still allow people to come to their business?
Yes, so I would welcome, we allow entrepreneurs to come to see how our group works. We think it's important part of being part of the community to allow entrepreneurs to see how an angel, like sitting in one of our monthly meetings. So yes, I would be happy to have any of you attend one of our meetings as a guest, and if you're interested in doing that, you can see me afterwards and we'll figure out how to do that.
So before we go, I want to mention that NC IDEA will also happens to be our sponsor tonight, but they have several grant programs that you might be interested in. One is their micro grant. I think that's about $10,000. Then they have their, well, the next bump up, I forgot the name of it, but it's $50,000, right? And then they also have if you're doing something like this, they would have an engage grant, right? So that's another thing. But the micro, and I forgot the next bump up, that 50,000, you might want to really look into that if you're looking for seed capital, right? And it's there is a criteria, but it may not be quite as difficult or onerous as it might be with an angel fund, right?
Was
May I-
competitive, but.
Yeah, and may I
It's
offer
definitely
another,
competitive.
so I'm gonna go back to something we talked about. How do you meet angel investors?
Seed fund.
Fill out that, every one of you should apply for an NCID grant,
Yes,
because there are investors who are in the group that evaluates those things. So now you're creating awareness of what you're doing within the investment community.
Right.
Whether or not you get money, right? It'd be nice to get money, but you're gonna create awareness about what you're doing, right? By participating in things like that.
precisely. So it's the micro and the seed. So thank you.
And helps you go bigger too in terms of how you're communicating your business, right? So,
Precisely.
it's important. It's
Yep,
important.
yep, yep. And they do this every so often throughout the year. So
And who was there again? Refresh me.
I'm
The
sorry.
name of the group that does.
It's called NC Ideas, and actually you'll see that they are sponsored by NC Ideas. So yes, so it's there. Also, if you don't mind, just scan that QR code. This little survey gives us an opportunity to see where you're at, where this is at, how this landed for you, how we could get better with what we're doing. And we appreciate your time, and listen, a round of applause. Thank you for your time, your insight, your knowledge exchange.
Yeah, can I pitch one more thing? It was mentioned out with USAA, we're this little, today, and we're this little red poppy and remembrance of Memorial Day. One thing I should note is that USAA serves military families, military affiliates. And we also have sponsored Bunker Labs. So if you're a veteran or veteran affiliates, wife, child, anything associated with the military, don't forget about Bunker Labs as well as other resources.